Thank you so much for coming. It's so appreciated, especially those of you who I know have driven a long way to get here. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. My name is Rhoda Shermer, and I'm the chairperson of North Jersey Public Policy Network. And perhaps there are some of you here who are new to our programs and may not know much about North Jersey Public Policy Network. We are a nonprofit, tax-exempt organization with now over 1,000 people in the network. And we are committed to bringing credible information to public forums such as this. We also have a speakers bureau, a newsletter, and a fact-checking service. And our goal is to just provide good information from credible, trusted sources and combat misinformation on key public policy issues. So we hope that this interests you. If you're not a member yet, that perhaps tonight you will sign up and you'll receive our newsletter, announcements of our programs, and more. Tonight's program is part of our year-long series, and we determined that our theme for 2014 will be the American Dream. Many of us think that the American Dream is slipping away. So all of our programs will deal with issues that relate to that one. And tonight's program, which is really a very key issue, is that of money influence. And money influence, many believe, is undermining democracy and impacting the lives of all of us ordinary citizens. So tonight you're going to hear from two experts who will discuss that particular issue. We're going to change our format tonight. Usually we have our speakers present, and then we have our fabulous question and answer session. But tonight we're going to do it a little differently. We're going to have the speakers shorten their presentations, and then they will have a discussion and dialogue on the topic between themselves, and then involve all of you. So it'll be a very intimate gathering of discussion on this very important topic. So I think we should start, and I'm going to ask Anne Ray and Mark Donge to introduce our speakers, and if Anne will please come up and introduce Andy Kroll. Thanks.
Hi. Andy Kroll is a staff reporter in the Washington, D.C. Bureau of Mother Jones magazine. He's reported on a number of subjects, including the foreclosure crisis, financial bailouts, Congress, the 2008 and 2010 elections, and on the environment. The Columbia Journalism Review said his investigation into the seamy underworld of foreclosure mills was a must-read and a great piece of muckraking journalism. He has written for the Detroit News, Salon, Alternet, and the Wall Street Journal. Currently, he is covering dark money that flows through the American political system.
I'm just going to go ahead and introduce David now, since we're going to have their own program. Many of us woke up to this issue of money in politics when Citizens United happened. That's not the case with David Donnelly. He's been active in this issue since the 90s, and he even was critical to 7 campaigns in different states to bring on public campaign financing, including the landmark Maine Clean Elections Act in 1996. So you can see he was addressing this issue long before the rest of us realized just how critical it was to us. He also mounted a relentless campaign to shine a light on Tom DeLay's corrupt practices, and eventually, of course, drove DeLay from office. In 2002, he joined the Public Campaign Action Fund, and he is now their executive director.
Good evening, everybody. Does that sound good? I'm going to come out here because I have some slides to go with. You know, and first I want to thank Rhoda for having this event and getting you all out. And yeah, round of applause for Rhoda. I was just telling David that, you know, I love talking about this issue and I love, you know, meeting new people. But, go back a little bit. There it is. But, you know, I think one of the reasons I came was, you know, Rhoda convinced me by sheer force alone and intensity and energy to come talk to you. And, you know, I couldn't say no to that. So, let me see if I can get this thing to work on the other side here. There it is. All right, so a little slide to open up for you. There we go. So, introduction slide. Staff reporter in the DC Bureau of Mother Jones Magazine. That first image you'll see there, the 47% video, did a little damage to Mitt Romney's campaign. One of the biggest stories of the campaign, that was us in 2012. Thought I would share that and some of the work that we have done. There we go, I think I found it. This is a cover story we did on money and politics. Whoa, 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 whoa. There we go. Hold on, there it is. So, no! I'm not doing anything. It's possessed. Okay, I'm not going to touch it. Next one. Yeah. You want to hit it manually for me?
Yeah. Well, let me just. It may be that the receiver's a little out of. Is that better?
What do I press to make the slide advance? Or just tell me.
And to advance the slide, I think it's not getting the
No.
receivers. Okay.
Is that
There
it?
we go.
I'll click it. You just give me the.
Thanks. I'll give you a little sign. So here's an opening quote for you. Two things that are important in money and politics. First one's money. I can't remember what the second one is. This, by the way, is a quote from the 1890s. So as you can tell, this issue of money and politics has been around for quite a while. $7 million cost of the 2012 federal election season. Most in history. Staggering amount of money spent mostly by these two guys. Mitt Romney, Barack Obama. First two candidates to break the $1 billion mark. Billion with a B. Just as a jog your memory, Bill Clinton ran for president in the 1990s. We were talking about $30 and $40 million. And these guys and their allies spent more than $1 billion each. So it's just to give you a sense of where we are and where we've come from. So two things I want to talk about. Super PACs. We talked about the campaigns, Barack Obama, Mitt Romney. But what I want to focus on right now and give you sort of a quick snapshot of are the outside money, the post-Citizens United money. So you have super PACs, and you have my job, dark money, secret money. Here's a chart. As you can tell, this kind of outside money, super PACs, non-profits, you hear about the Koch brothers, you hear about other major spenders in politics. This kind of money has absolutely exploded. 2010, of course, the year of the Citizens United decision, several other decisions that opened the floodgates, and that's the, we talk about the hockey stick chart in climate change. Here's your hockey stick chart in money and politics. Citizens United helped usher in super PACs. Some of them you've maybe heard of. This was a super PAC that supported President Obama. the one that attacked President Obama and supported Mitt Romney. In American Crossroads, this is Karl Rove's super PAC. And if you notice here on the left, these are super PACs that supported presidential candidates specifically. The top one for President Obama, the bottom one for Mitt Romney. Those were presidential candidates. This was sort of a novelty in 2012. Wow, a candidate has a super PAC. Well, as we go into the 2014 midterm elections, it's not a novelty anymore, it's basically a requirement. If you're a candidate, you're starting a campaign, you have a checklist. You need a campaign manager, probably need some offices. Now you need a super PAC. This is what we're talking about. This is how fast things move in electoral politics right now. Everybody's gonna need this kind of stuff. So, almost 1.1 million ads. This was a snapshot of the presidential campaign in 2012. This actually isn't in the whole thing. This was from the spring until the fall, I believe through October. That's how many ads fueled by super PACs, fueled by 2 of the super PACs, the 3 super PACs we just saw. So much money pouring in, buying television ads, making broadcasters very happy, and all of you television watching folks extremely ticked off. And almost 90% of them were negative. And this is another huge consequence of super PACs and Citizens United, is that the animosity, the mudslinging, the negativity on the airwaves has just escalated. It's quantifiable because of this outside money, again, pouring in, the kind that we're talking about. Billions of dollars of this stuff. So who gives to super PACs? Is another question. You know, is it you and I, we're big super PAC donors? No, not really. So here's a statistic that might resonate with you. 60% of super PAC money, super PAC spent, on par of $1 billion in the 2012 election season. So you have 60% of it, and there's 159 people. So that side of the room was filled up. Just over there. Those people gave more than $500 million to super PACs in the 2012 elections. So we're not talking about a super PAC as being a resource for the everyday person, the everyday voter, someone who volunteers, who clicks online or donates small amounts of money. This is the tool of the very, very wealthy. Some examples of these super PAC donors. This fellow, Sheldon Adelson, Las Vegas casino magnate, gave somewhere north of $100 million himself to super PACs in 2012. If you add in dark money, it's more about 150 million. So and that's one guy. This is what before super PACs, he couldn't do this. It didn't exist, and now he can if he wants to. We've got one more here on the right. Jeffrey Katzenberg. You might know him at DreamWorks Animation, Hollywood movie mogul. He, while not giving as much as Sheldon Adelson, was a key player in the Obama super PAC. One man gets a super PAC going, is the driving force behind it, and he arguably, did as much damage with the Obama super PAC as anybody to Mitt Romney. And he's just one guy. Another statistic for you. Mitt Romney and Obama, how much did they raise from everyday donors like us? Less than, $10, $15, $20, $100. $313 million, all told, the two candidates. How many super PAC donors does it take to match that? Or how many, on the average giving, did it take to match that in 2012? 32. A couple of rows right here. This is what a super PAC allows you to do. It allows you to match 3.7 million everyday small donors with just 32 people. This is the sort of, talking about a campaign system for the 1%. This is all the evidence that you need. So I, last year, 2012, was talking to a well-known progressive senator who is running for re-election this year, talking about super PACs. Can't say who he was for obvious reasons, But he gave me sort of an analogy. You know, he doesn't support super PACs. He doesn't want a super PAC supporting him. He wants to raise small money from the people of his state. So this is what he told me. Going up against a super PAC in a campaign is like going into a boxing match. You've got gloves on, or he's got gloves on, and the other guy has an Uzi. This came from the mouth of a prominent U.S. senator that I'm guessing a lot of you in this room probably really like. And this is what they see. This is what they feel. This is how unbalanced it is. And this is what big money does to these kinds of candidates. And the sad part is that when you talk to senators, even progressive senators, in some cases they say, you know, this scenario, you know, this is in the back of my head when I'm voting on a bill, offering an amendment, on the floor, doing a debate on a big issue. I know in the back of my head, I've got boxing gloves on, the other guy's got an Uzi. That weighs on how they decide, it weighs on how this senator decided and legislated and decided what to put out there and what not. So even without the money being spent, the senator told me this in 2002, the money has an influence on the legislative process. So now dark money, I told you two things, super PACs, now my day-to-day, my 9 to 5, dark money. So what am I talking about here? Well, partly these guys, who some of you may have heard of. Dark money is the anonymous money in our elections, used to defeat President Obama, used to defeat, you know, a U.S. senator or a House member, or in some cases defeat legislation, climate change legislation, public financing. I bring up these two fellows because they've become sort of synonymous with dark money. They, you know, and their allies moved, you know, recent Washington Post story found more than $400 million in 2011 and 2012 in dark money. This is sort of the evil twin of super PACs, if you will. Super PACs, at least we know in most cases who's giving the money and where it's going. With dark money, we don't know that at all. We don't know who the donors are, certainly. In many cases, we don't know where it's going. So how much has dark money exploded in recent years? Well, in 2006, just over $5 million. It wasn't that big of an issue back then. You know, this was before Citizens United. This was before, you know, the Koch brothers were a household name. You know, this was a different era. It feels like now. Oh, there we go. More than $300 million in the last election cycle, and that's a conservative estimate. It's likely a lot more, just because it's so dang hard to track this the whole point, right? It's not money. So going forward, 2016, how much? We have no idea. Could be 400 million, could double, could be 600 million. 2016 is easily said to be the most expensive election in memory. Candidates will need to raise $1 billion at least if they want to compete. And as for the dark money part, it could be off the charts. So I'll pass the mic to David now. Thank you.
I'm actually going to go back and sit down. Can we put the screen on?
Yes.
Tell myself to put the box of razor blades away. I actually think the problem that Andy described is a piece of the puzzle. It's a big piece. It sounds big. The other piece is the impact of that on our elected officials and what they do on a daily basis. description of the Uzi and the boxing gloves gets to part of it. The candidates are actually forced to spend more time raising money than ever before. But I think there's a deeper impact of all of this money, and that's on us. It's not just on the legislative process or the political process of running for office. It's the impact on us as citizens, and that it breeds cynicism that we matter. We did a recent survey, and we asked voters who they thought were the two biggest influences on their member of Congress, and we gave them 6 choices. And 65% had as the number 1 or 2 influence on members of Congress special interests or lobbyists. 52% had campaign contributors. 25% said party leaders. 24% said the media. 11% said, well, the members of Congress's own conscience. And then 11% said the views of their constituents. This is voters saying, what are the top 2 influences? Only 11% put their own views as one of the top 2 influences on their own member of Congress. Now, there's a joke in there about the conscience, right? It's like, well, does it really exist in a system like we have? But when you look at the top 2 issues there, special interests and lobbyists is number 1, and campaign contributors, the public opinion falls off a cliff after that. It's an incredibly strong analysis of who actually has power. And so it's no surprise when Gallup recently asked, who do you trust? What kind of trust you have? That members of Congress fall below car salesmen in measures of whether or not there's public trust. That's dangerous. It's kind of funny, but it's also dangerous that we're in a period of time where we have so little trust and so little faith in the people that we're sending to government, sent to the government is a regular joke. And that's why this sentiment, this overall public sentiment about universal anger at the problem and at the way it is, carries with it a little bit too much resignation that it's always going to be this way. And that's what I'm more concerned about, whether we cross the tipping point with the numbers that we see flowing into politics and the impact that money has, we know, on the actions of our institutions, and whether or not the public feels like they can do anything about it. Because even those of us who are in the know and are paying attention to public matters are even worried that even if we can do something about the problem, will the courts even back us up? We know in case after case in the last 2 decades, they really haven't been there. So in many ways, unfortunately, we've actually done a really good job at one part of this fight, in that we've won it, but we've won the wrong part. The part of the fight that we've won is we've shown that government is corrupt, beyond a doubt. We've won that public debate. There is actually no doubt, 90% of the public believes that government is corrupt. So that stage 1 is done. Now we need to figure out, how do we overcome that? How do we look at our institutions and trust that they're actually going to change things when we have so little faith that they can get it done? And that's why I think we need to talk about the issue of money in politics and shift away from the issue of corruption and more towards participation as the core value that we want to hold up in the ways that we fix our campaign finance system. And so I want to throw out the 3 traditional kinds of approaches that we tackle the public policy matters in this arena, and then talk about why I think some are better than others. There's the show me the money approach, right? The dark money. Let's find out who's getting the dark money. Let's find out who's paying for our elections. It's a little bit like the webcam at the bottom of the Deepwater Horizon disaster. It showed us all the, spewing into the Gulf, but it didn't do a damn thing to stop it. It's important to know that it's happening. It mobilized some public opinion. It mobilized people's attention, but it didn't do anything to stop the flow until they got down there and dealt with it. That's a little bit how I feel about disclosure efforts. It's incredibly important to know who's paying for our elections. It's very important for voters in the moment to know who's paying for the ad so they can judge the content of the message. If I were up here with a Tony the Tiger shadow, you guys know that ad? That like I'm an adult and I eat Frosted Flakes. So if I was up here in shadow, you didn't know who was speaking to you, you'd suspect, oh, he's not really kind of, willing to show his face. There must be something suspicious about why he's not willing to talk publicly. I think, in a democracy, if you are investing in electing people, you ought to have, you ought to be publicly identified. But still, again, you look back at the point of the problem I pointed out at the beginning, the cynicism. Disclosure alone could potentially deepen cynicism, right? Because it shows all the big players who have all the control. The second type of solutions I like to call them the cop on the beat, right? We need to police our campaign finance laws. The FEC is a joke. Most state agencies that police campaign finance laws are a joke. Right? The FEC is actually designed to gridlock. 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats. They have to have a majority, which means at least 4 have to vote for something to hold some organization or some individual accountable for breaking the law. And the FEC has had at least 3 or 4 years of 3-3 votes. All the Democrats on one side, all the Republicans on the other. Very rarely are they actually doing anything. It's designed for failure. So we need cops on the beat, but again, our campaign finance laws are relatively porous, right? So maybe we need new laws. Maybe we need to say some activities are illegal. We have some laws that say activities are illegal. You can't give more than $2,600 at a time to a federal elected official when they're running for office or candidate for federal office. But then, as Andy described, any candidate worth his or her salt needs the accessory of a super PAC. And so those have no limits whatsoever. There are ways to get around those types of making some practices illegal. And that's what leads me to think that our policies need to be organized around the issue of bringing more people into the political process, not just about getting the money out. It's not simply enough to say, let's get the money out of politics, because in a lot of ways that feels like a fool's errand with this current court. We need to think about bringing the people back in. So I want to talk a little bit about models of legislation that bring people back in. And I want to start by describing a story of an individual from Maine. So it's nice to mention the Maine Clean Elections campaign. It's the first law of its kind that was based on small dollar donations and candidates running under with public financing. One such person was a single mom waitress who worked at a diner in Auburn, Maine. The regulars at that diner said, hey, you're always eavesdropping on our political conversations. You always have something important or smart to say. Why don't you run for office? The locals in her community and the regulars at that diner collected the qualifying contributions for Deborah Simpson to run for office. Got her small contributions, helped her qualify for public money. She won a close race, went into the legislature, worked herself up to the legislature, became the chairwoman of the committee to reauthorize welfare reform. This is a mom who worked herself off of welfare and now is bringing her real life experience into redrafting the reauthorization of that law. She decided, well, you know what, I'm going back to school. Other people are like me, they're going back to school. Let's have education be part of the requirements. It's like an example of someone who brings their own experiences. It's not because they have a fat Rolodex or know a lot of Sheldon Adelsons of the world. We need more people like that in our political system, but we also need more people like those regulars at the diner. Right? Those people who are engaging in their local communities to help candidates run for office, not because they're the people that have been chosen to be the front runner in the horse race, or the party selects them, or that they have all the big money backers. So those are the types of things, types of policies that engage many more people. Now there's lots of different ways to do that, to incentivize participation in our political system. You can provide a tax credit for anyone who gives a small donation, so that it incentivizes people to engage and give a contribution to a candidate. You can provide a voucher to every single voter in the state, every single voter in the country. Give them $10, give them $25, give them $100, whatever that might be, to have them give to the candidate of their choice. That's a way to get candidates connected to regular voters. Think about that if I were a candidate standing here in front of all of you, giving a speech, and I knew that each one of you had $100 in your pocket that you hadn't spent yet, that you had received as a voucher. that you were gonna give to the candidate, I would pay attention to everyone here, right? Let's take it a step further. Let's say there's a multiple match on small donations, a 6-to-1 match, like a piece of federal legislation that will be introduced in a few weeks in Congress called the Government by the People Act by Congressman John Sarbanes. If that was a 6-to-1 match, I would even be more interested in talking to you, and you would be more interested in talking to me because you actually make a difference. That $100 now is $700, and you have, you have a reason that elected official or that candidate for office wants to be in touch with you. Think about how the incentives, we could change the incentives in our political system so that elected officials could pay more attention to more of us rather than a small number of us, the 32 people or the 159, I remember these numbers. So that would be a complete sea change. Now, I mentioned one law that was passed in Maine. There are a handful of them that passed around the country. The courts have chipped away at them in a variety of ways that I won't bore you. I could bore you for years. I hope I haven't done that already. But the real challenge in this area, I mentioned the cynicism. There's also cynicism in every area I do this with. There's cynicism among the reporters that you can't get anything done. That's why I'm really happy that I get to ask him questions in a little bit. There's cynicism among elected officials, right? Because they're on the fundraising treadmill constantly. They hate it, but it's a system they know. It's a system that they've succeeded in. They're getting a little worried about the super PACs. There's cynicism among those who provide funding for organizations like mine. That can you actually get anything done anymore? Why are we giving money year after year if we can't get anything done? And there's cynicism among the public. It's like, how do we actually come together to figure out these solutions? So I think it's incredibly important to have wins. And so that's why I mentioned that winning the public debate around corruption, while it was a little bit of a setup for saying, we won it too much, it's actually important that we've won that debate. There's no doubt about it. If you don't think there's a problem with money in politics in this country, you're not paying attention, right? So we've won that debate. We also now need to show that there are benefits for being on the right side. So from my perspective, there are three major things that we all need to do in the campaign finance community, as well as more broadly in citizenry to demonstrate that we're serious about this. One is to win elections. And you've been very kind. You didn't help me. I run a super PAC. I set up a super PAC for the sole purpose of electing champions and defeating opponents on the basis of where they stand on the issue of money in politics. I think it's incredibly important that we have champions in Congress. I think it's very important that there's a political price. I think this issue is all about politics and very little about ideology, which means I'm perfectly happy trying to figure out how to elect Republicans or Democrats. I just care where they stand on the issue, and I think we can do that in both parties. Number two, we need many more people mobilized to work on this issue. So we got politics, we got people. The people, we need a massive mobilization of people who are part of organizations like this one, like labor unions, like environmental groups, like small business groups, other organizations that are membership groups. At the end of the day, when we're trying to negotiate the final details of policy, if I'm still alive, I think I probably will be because I'm optimistic. I want the reform organizations to be in the minority around the table. I think it's really important that organizations that move their people into action or engage in public debates are active on this issue, and they don't have to be campaign finance geeks like me or like Andy. The third is that we need to shift, and I mentioned this earlier, what our values are on this issue. We are not interested in, let's go back to Lincoln. So Lincoln, of by for the people. It's not of by for the 1%, right? He also said, we want a more perfect union. Not a perfect union. We know that it's not the burden, it's the, it's not the burden, it's the gift of democracy as eternal vigilance. So we know we need to constantly work this. Our laws are never gonna be done. Our political system is never gonna be completely correct. We know that we need a more perfect union, and that means we need to continue to work at participation. That's the third key. It's politics, people, and participation ongoing. And so I feel incredibly inspired by the people that I work with at different organizations, people who come out to settings like this. But I think this is a moment that unless we tackle these major issues of cynicism, we may be going beyond the tipping point. And so I'm inspired by being with you here tonight. I have one request of you all, given that you all are New Jerseyites. We have federal legislation that's being introduced. That's a great package of legislation in both chambers. The House delegation, at least the Democrats in the state, have been very strong. If you know any of the Republicans in the House delegation, please be in touch with them. But all the Democrats have been on board, with the exception of Representative Payne, whose father was on board, but he has not been in Congress to be on board with this stuff. In the Senate, Senator Menendez has been a long-time supporter of this as well. But if all of you could tweet at Cory Booker, because he follows his tweets, to encourage him to be on board. Senator Durbin's bill. Senator Durbin will be introduced in the fair elections now after several weeks. That will be a great addition to our effort. So actually, let me stop here. And Andy and I are going to go back and forth. So I'm going to actually start. That's okay.
Yeah,
so this.
We're still in front of you. Let's wear.
No, let's move chairs. Is that going to work? No, passes.
How does it sound? Good?
Very live.
I'm so excited for this new format. And please start thinking of questions
Yes, definitely.
as well.
We're going to run out of pretty soon.
Write them down, get them going, we're ready.
So I laid out a very quick version of like what it would take to win. And I mentioned that reporters are pretty skeptical. So if you were advising us, if you were, one of these strategists that you talk to all the time to try to get through to them, to the Sheldon Adelsons of the world, what would you advise people like me to be tackling in this space?
You mean in terms of issues or strategy? Or?
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things, and this is borrowing from the work that you already do with Friends of Democracy. This is the super PAC David mentioned. I call it a anti-super PAC super PAC.
We embrace the irony.
Embrace, that's the tagline, right. And I think one of the smart things that you guys do and that I would advise people in this room as well who care about this issue and want to see some movement on it is connecting the issue of money in politics to issues, to climate change, to healthcare, to reproductive rights, to job creation, stimulus, those kinds of things. Because I do think that the money in politics issue can, obviously we have people here who are diehards who care about this as an issue itself. But I feel like there are so many people out there who, campaign finance, yeah, super PACs, I know something about that. But if you tell them, okay, well, here is how money in politics is stopping climate change legislation. Here's how money in politics killed cap and trade. Or here's how money in politics watered down the Affordable Care Act. Insurance industry money. I think that really resonates with people. And again, this is borrowing from something that you guys already do, but it clearly was a method that was successful in 2012. What were your guys' record? 8 of 9? 9 of 10?
8 of 9. Yeah.
8 of 9 races, Friends of Democracy, the anti-super PAC, super PAC. Played in 9 races, won 8, connecting money in politics with issues. Or were you talking about how a member voted?
So this is one of these things where I feel like we need to temper those messages, right? Not just the electoral component, but even as we're trying to engage, to use your example, on climate change. Like we're trying to engage the Sierra Club members on the issue. We want to educate them why the issue of money in politics is important, and you need those facts. We need to literally, connect the dots between who's giving money, what legislators are getting it, how they're voting in committees, and what impact that has on regular people. It's not a hard story to tell, but you need to tell and educate those members of the Sierra Club. But then you need to add to it, what can you do about it, right? Because otherwise you leave them at that place where they're thinking, oh my God, 7 of these 10 members in this committee are now like in the tank and I'm never gonna be able to move them. Right? You need to actually give them a sense that it's that you can overcome that. And that's where I think the kind of the solutions that talk about participation kind of lifts up the voices of regular people saying, we have a way that we can combat against this. And here are some provisions of these laws that can combat against the, and replace those big contributions with small contributions.
Which leads to my first question, which is that public, people powered elections, lifting people up, the legislation that you mentioned sounds so reasonable and so useful, and it's it puts small dollar donors, puts everyday people at the center of it, and you would think that candidates would love it. Why is this a polarized issue? Why is there a blue and red, Democratic, Republican divide around a solution that makes no distinction between whether you're a Democrat or Republican?
So one of my favorite examples of Republicans using the issue of public financing, running for office with public financing, is Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan ran that iconic Morning in America ad with our taxpayer money. He was running for office. He would never have been president. People think he would never have been president if he hadn't participated in the public financing program in 1976, which laid the groundwork for Bill to run in 1980. And in 1984, he did run that, I'm sorry, 1980 he ran the Morning in America, but he ran for re-election in 84. Every single Republican and Democratic candidate used that system up through George W. Bush when he ran in the primary outside of it, and then Obama took it even further. So the real challenge is designing a system that is attractive enough that candidates, regardless of the party, can see themselves winning under it. And right now we're in a situation in Washington based on a variety of factors that lots of policy matters are polarized, but the country is not that polarized. They're not as polarized as Washington. And so we just completed some national public opinion work that shows Republicans supporting the proposal that I just described, the Sarbanes proposal with government by the People Act that has a 6-to-1 match, a 6-to-1 public match on every small donation. They support it 55 to 34, Republicans do. Republican voters out there. Tea Party people support it by 53 to 27. So there's we may be talking about possibly we'll be talking about a Democratic bill because that's what's happening in Washington, but we're not talking about a Democratic issue, right? The issue is not Democratic or Republican. People across the political spectrum support it. The real challenge, I think, is politics. And so our job has to be, how do you create a space for Republicans to step out on this issue in Washington? How do you give them an opportunity to say, hey, I'm for something, right? So we're not just, criticizing every single candidate where they get their money, but we're also praising them for what policies they get on. There's a great bill by a representative from Wisconsin who wants to provide tax credits to Republican Representative Tom Petri. He's the only one on the bill. So what if we try to get 15 Republicans on that bill? That could be a real game changer in terms of changing the polarization of this issue.
You want to ask? Well, one I had was talking about successes and getting a little close to home here. I'm wondering what your reaction was to Bill de Blasio winning in New York, what lessons there are to be taken from that, and also looking forward to New York State.
So, do people know here that there is actually a public financing program in New York City?
Yes.
Yeah. So Bill de Blasio, the new mayor, along with all the other candidates in the race, and maybe one Republican didn't participate, operated under the 6-to-1 match. So a lot of people point to that, particularly in the primary, that Bill de Blasio would not have had the resources to compete against some of the front runners because they were the more established candidates citywide. And so he was able to compete on a relatively level financial playing field and was able to make his case. He didn't have more money than everyone else. So I think the existence of these systems allow candidates who have great ideas the opportunity to compete and have those ideas match up against the ideas of others. So de Blasio is a good example. That type of system is the subject of a pretty significant campaign in New York State to try to adopt something statewide. The governor says he's a supporter. He hasn't done a whole lot lately to push it. There's been an investigation of all the legislature about corruption charges called the Moreland Commission that's been in the paper, in the Times anyway. And there's going to be an effort underway to try to win in the legislative session. It fell 2 votes short in the state Senate in 2013. So let me ask you something. So does anything surprise you anymore about this issue? I mean, I've been at this a while, and sometimes my stomach gets turned by the Attorney General in Florida canceling an execution because he has a fundraiser, right? So there are some things that still really bother me about this. But are we so jaded now that is there anything that is it just a problem of the scale, or is it really the quid pro quo, or what is the nature of the problem that really bothers you the most?
That is a good question. I think it's easy to become immune to numbers. In seeing big numbers, I mean, I put a lot of them up here on my presentation to give you a sense of the scale. But it's funny now. Even my editors will come to me and they'll say, "Wow, why do we care about this particular effort or this particular group? They're only going to spend $40 million." And I'm like, well, yeah, I guess it's not 40 billion, but 40 million is still a lot, and so there is sort of like a number fatigue, a decimal point fatigue, if you will, or zeros fatigue. And the thing that still, I guess, shocks me in covering what I do, several things. One is the inventiveness of lawyers, who every day I'm learning of new ways in which they figure out how to get around the law or mask someone's identity, and how they, are always one step ahead of where the campaign regulators are in our government, or in the federal government or the states. Someone the other day told me the government on this issue is always fighting the last war, which sort of hit me, and I was like, wow, that's a really good point, and kind of depressing, and it also was why I tend to think that when this idea of people in participation doesn't try to do that, doesn't try to put a finger in the dam and say, oh, we're going to stop this particular type of group because a hole pops up over here, and a hole pops up over here, and there are hordes of well-trained, suited men and women in Washington, D.C., whose job it is alone to do that. The other thing that gets me as well is, and we've seen this a lot lately, is there's a rash of retirements in Congress, or members saying, I'm not going to run again, it's too polarized, to this, to that. But anytime they're asked about their job and how it's changed and what they don't like about it, polarization is one thing, but man, they hate fundraising. They hate spending 6 hours a day in a tiny little cubicle somewhere, calling people that they may or may not know and saying, please give me money. And they talk about how that's eroded the fabric of the Congress. People don't get along anymore. People, because they're spending time raising money, and the relationships that made Congress work in the past aren't there anymore. And this is a bipartisan thing. This is the reddest Republican congressman, the bluest blue senator will say the same thing. Man, I hate calling people and asking for money every single day. And hearing that over and over again still gets me as well.
I think we should go to the audience.
Yeah, great.
Questions? There's one in the back.
So how do you convince someone who is cynical and will not vote, but other than that, they seem to be, a good person, has opinions,
Yep.
thinks that, politics is just stupid, and why should I bother putting any effort into it? It's not going to do any good. How do you convince them to at least vote, let alone participate in other ways?
Yeah, and I don't think it's just on this issue. I think it's across all the different issues that any organization or any of us care about. I think we have a trust problem in our institutions. There's no silver bullet. It's about tangible, concrete, even small, discernible change. And being able to let people know that how their actions are connected to seeing some movement somewhere some ability to express either accountability on a member of Congress, a member of Congress or the state legislator or the city council member will have to pay attention because people are paying attention to them. So that's an important component of our democracy. So even if, you know, there's no simple answer to this, it's simply we have to celebrate our wins and not just point out our problems. And our wins may be very, very small. Our wins may be, only matter to a community. But I think this is a huge problem for our society right now. I don't think it's just about the issue of money and politics. I work on this issue, and I feel acutely that we have done a very good job of convincing people of the problem and not a great job of mobilizing them on solutions.
Do you feel that the dark money problem is in any way related to the problem of the disparity of wealth and power in America?
Yes, let me repeat the question so that everyone can hear it. The question was, is the dark money problem related to the growing disparity of wealth in America? Yes and more, right? And I want you to answer this too. It's not just the dark money, right? So it's all the money. And you know, there's a political scientist at Princeton who's done a study of those people who are economically well off. Their views are clearly represented in the viewpoints of elected officials. The views of people who are lower down on the economic ladders are not. And I think money is part of the reason why, if I'm an elected official, I'm spending the 6 hours a day, I'm not calling people who are giving $50, I'm calling people who have the disposable income of $2,600 or more. And that is human nature, that the views, the things that you hear, the ideas you're exposed to are narrowed based on the economic viewpoints and the class viewpoints of those that you're spending a lot of time with. But you should.
Yeah, you know, a statistic that came out a week or two ago that I'd also note that I found interesting. I think this was for the first time in history, or the first time in recent history, more than half of members of Congress were worth $1 million or more. And you know, that on its own is just a kind of staggering statistic, and that obviously shapes how you think, but it also speaks to the type of person who can afford to go to Congress, to run for Congress, let alone win. And you know, it's not waitresses working in diners who are in Congress with the way the system works right now.
But they should be. That's the point.
Yeah, right. Oh, of course. Yeah, without a doubt. The research that David cited is that's something that I continually go back to. It's almost like a North Star in a way, remembering like this is how this warped Congress that we have affects policy. And when you have a Congress comprised of these types of people, because you have this system that gets people there, you have the outcomes we have right now, you know, with widening income inequality and very little progress being made toward narrowing that. I mean, the flip side would be when you have a system that does empower ordinary people, giving small amounts of money and participating, like you do in New York City, you elect a mayor who makes this issue the centerpiece of his campaign. And I think that's a great sort of contrast with what you see in the United States Congress. And it, you know, it's a taste of what could be done.
Hi, this doesn't relate directly to money and politics, but it's kind of a similar issue, the Electoral College. Now, most people in America pay attention to presidential elections, so if we could have a popular vote, wouldn't that just give everybody a sense of empowerment that might translate down to, oh yeah, I could change the Congress now, or, you know, even though that wouldn't change that much, but still it would give people a feeling that they had some power, because they all pay attention, or most pay attention to presidential politics. And they could see the candidates come to New Jersey, which never happens.
Yeah, I mean, there is a really innovative proposal called the National Popular Vote model, which is a compact between states. States will have passed laws that say we will give up our electoral college votes to the winner of the national popular vote. And if enough states actually adopt such a policy, then by de facto, the national popular vote winner will be the winner. There are several states away from the enacted, 15 states or so, maybe a few more. But yeah, it is a historical anomaly for lots of different reasons. It does concentrate the campaign in a few number of places. Those people are bombarded with the 1,076,000 ads. I mean, so, and the rest of us are, we don't get it. So, but it would probably make campaigning for president more expensive. I don't think that's a bad thing if they are raising money in small contributions from lots and lots of people. If we were more engaged in the political process and elections cost more, and the money was spread out to educate more of us, I think that's a fine thing, even if elections are more expensive, as long as they're not dominated by just a very small number of people.
I've got a question about the, if voters are making contributions themselves, it's a 1-to-6 ratio, where does the other 6 come from?
From a public fund. In this bill that we're talking about in Congress, it's called the Freedom from Influence Fund. And it's funded by offsets of getting rid of special tax breaks and other kinds of, I think it's the polluter pays type messaging. Polluters should pay to clean up stuff. I think the special tax breaks ought to be closed down to pay for cleaning up this, because most of those are gotten through using lobbyists, using campaign contributions, and influencing the process anyway. It's actually a relatively small amount of money, just to, it's a rounding error in federal budget terms. It's like over 10 years, the system to pay for all federal elections, at least for Congress, is $6 billion. We lost more than that in Iraq. We lost $7 billion in Iraq, unaccounted for.
Lost, unaccounted,
we don't know
disappeared.
Right? So it is a rounding error. That's why, again, this is not an ideological issue. This is a political will issue. It just is simply about whether or not the political will be there to do something like this. It's actually very modest amount of money.
There is a national proposal on a table called the American Anti-Corruption Act, which appears to, aside from the public funding of elections, have a lot of elements in it that could go a long way to addressing some of these issues, as well as it seems to have support across the political spectrum. Support. So I haven't heard any mention of that. What's your feelings on it?
All these proposals have support across the political spectrum. They don't have, very few of them have support across the political spectrum among elected officials in Washington, right? That's the real breakthrough is going to be that. And I think there are lots of different ways to skin this cat, right? I think there are lots of different proposals, and I think it's really important to try them out at the state level, at the local level, to figure out what works. By and large, I believe it'll be a hybrid of all the things that we see work, so I don't think any one policy will fix this. So there are components of the American Anti-Corruption Act that are very similar to the bill that's going to be introduced in Congress in a few weeks. They're going to pilot a voucher program, for example. We're going to have a refundable tax credit. They're very similar proposals in some respects, but they're not. The one in Congress is not omnibus. It's not something that deals with lobbying restrictions and all the other, attempts to kind of separate the outside money from candidates. There's a variety of other reasons, other policies to address the problem. I think the central policy or central value that we need to work on is participation, bringing more people in rather than just policing the other activities. I think policing them is important, but unless we start shifting our debate towards participation, we're going to further, I believe, create cynicism because we're only talking about the parts of the problem that are about policing it rather than engaging people. So I think, these are all things that need to be, tried. We have plenty of time to figure this out on the federal level, because nothing's gonna happen this congressional session in terms of passing something.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the anti-corruption measure was as much, sort of a signpost of idea, a nice set of ideas or aspirations, and there is some stuff in there that matches the work you're doing, and that other members of Congress are doing, and other things to me seem a little more speculative or Hail Mary at times. But I mean, I think it's a good discussion to have. I wanted to ask you two real quick, not to steal your thunder here. Citizens United Amendment is something that has gone around. I have thoughts on it, but I don't know if we've ever talked about it. But I'm curious to know what your take on it is.
So there are a variety of different efforts that are about trying to amend the Constitution, not just about Citizens United, but about Buckley versus Valero, the decision in 1976. There've been a whole slate of bad, Supreme Court cases and district court cases that have changed the terrain on which we try to draft campaign finance law. And at some point, we're either going to need to change the courts, or we're going to have to change the Constitution, because Congress ought to have the ability to regulate campaign spending. I don't believe that the ability to, put it this way, I think in a democracy, there are some things that should belong to all of us, right? I think elections are something. If you want to go buy a second house and go buy a nice boat or buy a magazine, you should be able to go do all those things, right? But there's some things like elections that kind of belong to all of us, and so I don't think you ought to be able to buy one. And we're at that point where Americans believe you can. The court kind of thinks you should be able to, and the kinds of laws that we're talking about, trying to participate the problem away, may not get us all the way there. And it may not get us all the way there fast enough. One of the really important things about Citizens United to remember is that, actually there's one thing I wanted to correct in your statement. So Sheldon Adelson, before Citizens United, could have done what he did. He couldn't have done it with other people, he could have done it on his own. What Citizens United largely is, it wiped away the gray area in our campaign finance law. Sheldon Adelson could have spent $100 million on his own, targeting Barack Obama by name, saying vote against this guy. He just couldn't have run it through another organization to do it. He couldn't hide the money elsewhere. But we've always had organizations that have had the ability to influence politics. 2 days before the Citizens United case came down, there was a special election in Massachusetts for a Senate seat that was once held by Ted Kennedy. Scott Brown won that, seat Republican. The Chamber of Commerce spent $1 million in the last 10 days of that election. This is 2 days before Citizens United. So what really has changed in our politics since Citizens United is the norms, is the practice, is the acceptance that this is okay. In the gray area, this gets wiped away for all those lawyers to create all those loopholes. So I think the amendment strategy is important as an organizing tool. I think it is a long ways from moving something. I think we may see progress in the courts. I think it's really important to figure out bolder strategies than what we have on the table now.
Would it be possible to connect the dots? The idea of the scandals that used to come down about lobbyists, that was money from lobbyists going to congressmen. Is there some way you could get retiring congressmen to say, I would have voted against that bill, except that my colleague voting for it would have gotten $5 million from the NRA? Start to reveal the kind of things. I mean, you mentioned
There's some that have amazing stories about this. Yeah.
Why can't they air this stuff?
Senator Alan Simpson has amazing. Yeah, Senator Alan Simpson. He says about his former Republican colleague Mitch McConnell that he's the only person who, when he started raising money, his eyes shined like diamonds. And there are members that talked about literally being pulled off the floor in the middle of the Medicare Part D fight with pharmaceutical lobbyists to twist their arms, threats against other members. There are those stories, and they're outrageous, and they go on daily. and members only get the courage to talk about them when they've left, and they have very little influence, and they lose their influence by doing so over any of their former colleagues. Jack Abramoff is someone who's campaigning around the country on this issue. He can't get any calls returned in the Republican caucus these days. So there is there are important stories to tell. There are necessary but not sufficient, I think, to make the kind of change and to change the structure. This is a structural change where all the incentives, if you're inside the system, is not to rock the boat. Jim?
Sure, this gentleman right here.
I've run across many issues in trying to organize people for different environmental issues. One is, you're asking for increased participation. A big thing I run into is, I don't have any time. I have no time. I have absolutely no time. You know, I have kids here, there. You know, I'm all over the map. We have this mortgage, and how do you counter that? Simplicity campaign, everybody, start to live like we did in the 30s.
That's
have rights with a bouillon cube.
You can go on a website and you can click and vote for, an amendment to the Constitution. It takes a minute.
So I think this is a question that's actually connected to the disparity in income. It's connected to what's happening in our economy. That we can go, we can click on a site, we can sign up for stuff, we can inform ourselves, we can make a phone call. But if you really are trying to deeply engage people, deeply engage in in their own agency and then turning into leaders, we are confronted with a period in our history that the economic pressures on families are intense. That is, there are many of our fellow community members that are working a couple of jobs or have to, usher their kids around or work. There's, it's a real problem for organizations that are trying to truly organize people. There's no easy solution to that. It's not about fixing the economic system so that we can organize, because we have to organize to fix the economic system. But I don't think there's, I think it's about finding tangible things that people can do that are concrete, that make changes in their communities, and continually try to engage them. And I don't think there's any shortcut to this.
One thing I'd add, just talking to people specifically about the money and politics issue, and they say, well, I don't know if I want to, the little time that maybe I do have to volunteer or help out, I don't know if I want to do that for money and politics. Maybe I want to do it for the environment. Maybe I want to do it for the local, my kid's school or whatever. A point I always make to folks about the importance of this issue, not just on its face, but, and I've learned from writing about it, is that, money and politics underlies everything. It influences everything. And it matters. The kinds of things that the work that David is doing at the state level, at the federal level, that feeds into all of these issues: the environment, healthcare, income inequality, jobs, all that kind of stuff. And so, and it's always there. And this is an issue that then, if you want to commit some time to this, maybe you will be able to help contribute to solutions on all these other things. And I think that's sort of forgotten. People think, it's a campaign finance, sounds wonky, sounds really legal, lawyers should do it, I shouldn't. But making this point sort of it's connective tissue between all these things, I think is helpful for me and helpful for people understanding and caring about it. Red sweater?
Got a lot of points. I'll try to. Can everybody hear? Both of you. You emphasize participation. You emphasize connecting the dots between money and politics and the lives we live right now, the problems we have. I try to take that opportunity every time. The person who says, I don't have time, I try to tell them how it could be different. I've lived when it was different. And this is why we had the time. And wouldn't we not, how could we change it back? To make it very
also an optimist. But I envision that if we each take a role in this, that we can change it. But I think we have to learn how to talk to people. Lately, I've talked to more people who disagree with me in most politics because they agree with me about GMOs and no jobs and unemployment benefits. So this is a place where we can connect and listen to each other a bit and start working with where we agree rather than where we disagree. So I think a lot of this is going to boil down to taking responsibility and learning how to talk to each other.
I don't have anything to add.
Can I segue that to a question for you? Talking about the importance of how we talk to each other. And you and I have talked about this, how to best sort of explain and sell people on, why these kinds of solutions, sort of people-centered campaign finance solutions are the best. How do you, well, I guess to members of Congress, that message is quite different than to regular people. But how do you explain that to them, talk to them about this? I mean, obviously we've got a lot of it tonight, but what's the key, the essence of it?
I think it all boils down to whether or not our voices are heard in the democracy, right? It all boils down to whether or not you feel like you have any control or any voice when it comes to the consent of the governed, right? That's a pretty straightforward concept, that when we speak, we want to be heard. When we talk to our elected official, we want them to think that we matter, right? It's about our personal, whether we matter to those that we have elected as leaders. Talking to members of Congress is a completely different experience, right? Because, in Congress, in 435 members of Congress, there's 435 experts on how best to do this, right? Because they're all looking at this through the prism of their own experience. It's not like talking to them about minimum wage. They may have some concept of like what it's like to work at, for $9.25 or $7.75 or because they may have a son or a daughter that's working at that, or maybe way back when they worked minimum wage, but actually very few of them, given that they're millionaires, really have that idea. But they do have an idea about what kind of rules govern how they keep their jobs, right? This is about their job preservation, this issue. So it's a very different conversation with members of Congress than it is with the public. What we've been trying to convince members of Congress who are supportive of this to do is to not talk about themselves, is to know that the way they're going to connect with the public is by saying, I want to do something that gives you more voice. I want to do something on this that allows your voice to be heard just as loudly as someone else, right? We had one person work with us on some language and messaging stuff, and he said, he had a great line. It's the voice of the coal miner should be heard just as loudly as the voice of the mine, the owner of the mine in which he works. So it's that is an interesting concept that we all should have our voices heard. Not that the mine owner shouldn't be heard, and he or she should be just louder than the rest of us. So that's the central concept. That's such a universal idea. Right? It's such a universal idea that in a democracy, it's one person, one vote. But then you can get into how does this do that? But if you keep that central idea there, then you're on the path.
What is the counterpoint? Everyone in the room, I think, is on the same page, right?
Great.
So we all agree. So if Sheldon Adelson were standing up there, what would he say?
He actually had a great statement earlier. Did everybody hear the question? What would Sheldon Adelson say? Or what would the counterpoint be? Sheldon Adelson said basically, I shouldn't be able to do this, but I can. Like a Bloomberg reported that, in the midst of spending on $100 billion. The counterpoint is, you know what? These things won't work. They won't work. It's going to, lots of bureaucracy. Money's always going to find a way. We're going to waste taxpayer money on this rather than putting it in our schools, in our, police, and in, healthcare or protecting the environment. Let's not waste the money there because money's just going to find a way. My answer to that is, you know what? I think if we get candidates who are paying more attention to regular people, and the incentives are to go to the people to get support, then that's going to change the entire connection between the, you know, the people and elected officials. And, you know, I mentioned earlier how little money this is. We've seen these things work. We've seen these things work really well when given the chance. You know, and that's, you know, that's why this is just about politics, really about changing the political environment.
And having covered this in talking to all sides, talking to the, you know, people who work for the Koch brothers, the people who work for George Soros or whatever, and then also, you know, people, you know, an argument you often hear is about other ideas for reform. It's like, you know, we need to close this way of using dark money. We need to ban super PACs. You know, often the response is, well, you're curbing my free speech rights. And this is protected under the First Amendment. My ability to dump $100 million into a super PAC and run as many negative ads as I want. And the court says that I can do this. The court led by Chief Justice John Roberts.
You're not talking legality when you're having this conversation. You're talking about practicality. Everyone can do it, you know. So the fact is, how do you shame somebody, or how do you bring it into the middle of the road person? Because I view this, commented to read an email, that this sometimes it's viewed as being a left-wing thing. Okay? I hear for the first time tonight that it's not necessarily that way. So the question is how do you mobilize the people in the middle who understand this? Okay? I think you have as much a public relations issue as you do a political issue.
Well, but I think I don't disagree in terms of finding what that right message is for those people in the middle, but I think what you've heard earlier from their polling is that, you know, a message that talks about banning this or this new regulation probably doesn't do that well, or doesn't poll that well, and maybe that is favored by Democrats and liberals and not by Republicans and conservatives, but something that is about participation and people, putting more people in as opposed to cutting something out, does have broad appeal, no?
It all has broad appeal. The question is what's going to stand up over time and what really is the kind of solutions that will, you know, I'm interested in exercising the muscles of democracy in order to win something that has a more robust democracy. Like, the participation isn't just about a message, it's about how we want to think about our work to get there. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. I get it, but you have an on the ground.
Yeah. So let me give you.
You're in a battle, okay, and you're in a war. So how do you win each little battle?
So let me give you an example. So we mentioned the super PAC that I helped to help. We literally waited to the end of campaigns in 2012. We targeted those persuadable voters that were in the middle. We sent mail, did phone calls, and did education just to those voters that were the swing voters in those districts. It persuaded them to vote for the reformer, not the anti-reformer. And so not a poll, but a real life example of moving voters to support a pro-reform candidate. And those voters that moved were independent voters. They weren't Democrats, right? They were people who had not made up their minds yet at the very end of campaigns. So it is possible to do this work if you think through a very, tangible, concrete, not political hack actually by trade. I don't admit that often. So, these are the kinds of like really, nuts and bolts strategies that we need to export and have many more organizations do.
How many Republicans were there to 9 people?
So this is the issue. So the answer is none, but this is the issue, right? The issue is that the issue is not partisan among voters, it is in Washington, right? And so the strategy is to engage in changing the story on the Republican side of the aisle in terms of elections. It's a completely different strategy than how you get Democrats on, because of where they start. And so we have the beginnings of those strategies. A Republican in North Carolina, Walter Jones, is willing to be supportive of these types of policies. Walter has a primary plan. Whoever wins the primary is going to win the general. We're not going to wait till the general election to do that work. We're going to work in the primary election to help a pro-reform Republican win in that primary. So that we can tell the story, see, it works on the Republican side too. We need more examples like that. We need to figure out how to create those examples. The conversations I've had with members of Congress, Republicans, who aren't willing to come out and say they're for reform, even though I talked to one guy a few weeks ago, last week, who was for a constitutional amendment, member of Congress, right? For a constitutional amendment, a Republican. He was not willing to talk about it because there's no space, there's no benefit to him in the Republican Party to do so. We need to figure out how to create that benefit for people to step out on the issue.
I have a quick question about that. In North Carolina, you're targeting these undecided voters in the primary, so they're kind of super Republicans. Did you convince them that publicly financed elections was good for them?
We haven't done it yet. It'll be in a few months.
Oh, but that's.
But that is an example of how we would engage in a place like that to try to help a Republican, a pro-reform Republican.
So you'll use that issue to try to convince them?
We will use a variety of issues that are connected to money politics to do that.
Thank you.
You mentioned that to connect money, politics, and all specific issues. Is there someone that actually do the research that
Yeah, so there's several great, there are really talented, really committed, very dedicated people working at a lot of organizations on this issue that I think are, they're doing great work. One organization that does the work that you're describing is called MapLight, where they tie the money that flows into campaigns to the votes that are cast by members of Congress. They talk about who's on one side of the bill. The Center for Responsive Politics has incredibly good industry coding. So MapLight is maplight.org. The Center for Responsive Politics is opensecrets.org. The Sunlight Foundation also does some of the storytelling of connecting the dots. It's sunlightfoundation.com.
Yeah.
And then there's this magazine called Mother Jones that once in a while reads
Has anybody done any case studies like the Blasio case where campaign finance actually changed who ran, what issues, and like help educate the public?
Yeah, so my organization has done a fair number of interviews with candidates who have used systems like this and how campaigning was different. And they're on our website. Publiccampaign.org is our website. It's just one C in the middle of public campaign. I'm not sure why they did that when they started it, but they did. And there's a blog there. If you search for videos on the blog, you're likely to find them. If not, Rhoda can get in touch with me and I'll be able to direct you there.
And David, one candidate you haven't mentioned is, and her name is escaping me, in upstate New York, the state senator. Cece Kachik, is that a kind of?
One of the 9, yeah. So
right.
One of the 9 races that we were engaged in. Cece Kachik is a state senator, was on the school board there, was a farmer, ran against a longtime politician, was down 12 points in the polls a month out, was campaigning on the issue of money in politics. Her opponent was against it. We spent some money to educate voters there about his position. The guy responded by going after her. Long story short, she closed the gap, won by 18 votes. This is a state senate. I'm sorry?
How much money was used to win that?
So on both sides combined, there was about $2 million spent in the entire state senate race.
Okay.
We spent about $250,000. The opponent spent more. I don't have the exact figures, but he had like 60% of the money in the total race was his. But she rose, she campaigned on it. They closed the gap, and these, after we count 18 votes, she went into the state senate.
Are there more questions?
Yep.
Because we want to all get your questions answered. So, but how many more people
I'll do
have
short
questions?
answers.
We'll take 3 more questions.
Now, we're talking about this whole issue of getting people engaged and interested and getting people to pay attention, and it's a valid issue. But we've all read, and 2 points, okay, we've all read the same thing, all right? Everybody hates Congress. Okay, Congress has a 9% approval rating, but everybody thinks their representatives are wonderful. Okay?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't.
We've all read that. We keep saying the same stupid answers back to Congress. Point 1.
That number is closing. That
Point
gap is
1.
closing.
Point 2. Okay, again, this whole mindset of engagement, look at how few, and no offense to anybody under 50, but look at how few young people are in this room, really. Okay? Very few young people in this room. Okay, and my idea is, you know why? Because we all know how it should be. The older of us among us, I know how it used to work and how it should work, and we're trying to fix it. So you get two issues, mindset and getting younger people involved.
So, on the member of Congress, your member versus, all members, that gap is unfortunately it's closing, unfortunately, for the your member part. And we just did some survey work in December, and it's actually quite shocking. I just did a briefing for members of Congress and their staffs today in DC, and they're a little worried about it, which is good, right? Because they have to look over their shoulders. The second question is very important, and again, like I don't just do polling. I'm not that kind of little hack, but there is some great polling that I've just seen about how millennials, those are 30 and younger, believe that the problems in the economy are because of Washington, because Washington is screwed up. So whether they're going to get plugged in to try to fix this issue is a whole other question. I don't know the answer to that, but they're not deaf to this, right? They're not deaf or blind.
And I'd add as well, having covered the Obama campaigns in 2008, 2012, the Obama campaign did incredibly well to...
In 8, not so much in 12.
Right, I'm talking about finding ways to reach out to young people and getting them whether to volunteer or in many cases to donate, especially small amounts of money because young people aren't cutting $2,600, $5,200 checks. So I at least, from my peers and both people that I know and write about and frankly, Democrats and Republicans, they love the idea of a campaign that asked them for $5 or $10 and wanted them to feel like they were participating, wanted them to feel like they had some ownership. Is that the same as them engaging on the reform part? No. But it's a start, and I feel like there is, and technology has really accelerated this as well, which the Obama campaign did so well both times. But I do feel like young people are drawn to that participation model, and they love chipping in a little bit of money and feeling like they're part of something. Now convincing them that hey, we need to do this for 535 other people, is another step. But I think that desire is there, or at least that starting feeling is there. This guy in the front.
Yeah, with regards to the dark money, has anybody been successful in fighting from the opposite side, from the grassroots side? I know Darcy Sumner tried one. She was trying to come up with applications where, only that the codes have too much influence behind the election. She wanted someone to develop an application. You go to the supermarket, you basically get the paper towels and staples. You find out which paper, copy paper, goes to the industry. I'm going to buy somebody else's. Because if you're taking all your money correcting the elections, then I want you to have less of a pot of money to correct the election. So I was just wondering if anybody who's prior to investments, they're either owns casinos. There's a lot of casinos in Las Vegas. You can basically sit there and say, you're basically almost putting to the election. Maybe I should go to the winner.
So, short answer is we need lots of innovation in this area because we also need lots of wins. That aren't, because we're not going to win public policy overnight, but we need other kinds of wins to hold some of this money in check. I think there should be a campaign launched against dollar stores in North Carolina because they're all owned by Art Pope, who's the guy who's literally financed the takeover of North Carolina politics and has rushed through anti-democracy laws across the board. And he owns all these dollar stores at which lower income people, African Americans shop, or people who he literally is disenfranchising with these laws. He's pulling money out of those communities.
Is he just in North Carolina?
No, he's other places. But he's got some stores in Ohio. But there are people who are trying to figure out strategies. Getting to scale and actually getting the leverage over targets really, really hard work. But there are smart people thinking about it.
Okay, before we close the program, I hope you've been motivated enough to get engaged. NJPPN is just launching its called Restore Democracy, where we hope to take on some of the issues that were discussed here tonight. So if those of you that might be interested, we will contact you, and Ann and David will take your name and contact information. We'd be really happy if you decided you did want to become engaged and participate. So David and Ann, if you can roam around and see if you can enlist any people. The second is I wanted to let you know about a program that we're having in February, on February 20. And somebody asked the question about communicating with the different types of Americas. And we're having, this particular program will be on climate communication, and we're having people from Yale who have done seminal work on identifying 6 different Americas and how to communicate with those 6 different Americas, and that might be an interesting program with spillover to all these other issues. And then finally, I want to say to you, if you're not a member of NJPPN, and you want to get our newsletter, you should sign up, and you'll get the weekly newsletter with announcements about our upcoming programs that all will deal with issues related to the American dream. And lastly, please don't leave without leaving a donation. We depend on you. We're not-profit. We're all 100% volunteer. We don't raise money other than what we hope you can contribute at some of these programs if you felt you found them worthwhile. And I think you should have found it very worthwhile tonight. Do you think you learned anything? Andy, for a very nice format. I kind of like it. What do you think? Yeah.
Mom's gonna shake you down.
Huh?
She's gonna shake you down for money.
Shake us down.
They contribute in ways. Every holiday, Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Trying to get it. I felt like I was trying, like he had some like surprise thing. You know, like I don't want to go too fast because he's gonna talk. Yeah.
I want to get some Rhoda shot. Maybe do a nice little something like that. We don't need the audio. This is like cutaway B-roll stuff. Maybe old man Rivers probably. Yes, that is it. That is a wrap, ladies and gentlemen.